He had been mopping the floor when the laughs echoed behind him, sharp, cruel, and meant to sting. He was just the janitor for them, the man who cleaned up after them. But what they never knew was that the man they ridiculed had a story far greater than any of theirs. Behind the uniform hid a truth powerful enough to humble every soul in that building. What happens when the one they looked down on turns out to be the one they should have looked up to all along?
Marcus had worked at the company for almost a decade. Every morning, he came in before the sun, silently polishing the floors and wiping down desks that nobody ever thanked him for. To most, he was invisible, a background figure in a uniform, a man whose name they never learned. But Marcus didn't mind. He took pride in his work, humming softly as the city outside began to stir.
Yet, beyond that calm routine lay something deeper, a silence to which he had grown accustomed, the kind that follows when years have passed being judged before being known. He watched people pass him every day, their eyes sliding over him as if he were part of the furniture. Still, he smiled, carrying secrets that could shatter every assumption they had about him. What nobody noticed was that this normal morning would mark the beginning of a day they would never forget. The day when the janitor they had shunned would show them who he really was.
It had been an ordinary morning. Marcus wheeling his cart along a deserted hall, the floor polish smell hanging in the air. Employees bumped into him, their heads down and eyes focused on their cell phones. They never looked back. But that day, something had felt different, a sense that whispers followed wherever he went. He had, at first, brushed off the feeling. Maybe it was nothing. Then he caught the look, that acute, cutting glint from a new manager named Claire. An upward wriggle of her nose, as if his presence were a gratuitous annoyance. "Make sure you don't scratch the floors this time, all right?" she muttered under her breath, loud enough for others to hear. A few giggled. Marcus had said nothing. Years of quiet endurance had taught him how to mask the sting behind a calm expression. Later that afternoon, the company was getting ready for the important investors' visit. Everybody was on edge, cleaning, rehearsing presentations, fixing minor details. Marcus was told to stay out of sight, just until the meeting ended. He nodded, even though the words cut deep. He'd been part of that building longer than most of them, yet he was always treated like he didn't belong.
I don't know why they keep
As he
people
cleaned
like
the
that
conference
around.
room before the investors'
Barely
arrival,
educated.
he overheard a
Probably
few
couldn't do anything
executives
else.
talking nearby. They spoke carelessly, assuming he couldn't understand, or maybe believing he wasn't worth acknowledging. "I don't know why they keep people like that around," one man said. "Barely educated. Probably couldn't do anything else." The others laughed. Marcus's hands froze on the mop handle. For a moment, he wanted to walk out, to finally say something, to demand respect where respect was due. But instead, he stayed silent. He needed this job. Or so everyone thought. Then the breaking point came. The main investor, a gray-haired gentleman in a tailored suit, showed up well before his predicted time. He strode right into that very room where Marcus was still hard at work, the manager hurrying in behind him, flustered. "Oh, I'm so sorry, sir," she gasped, tugging at Marcus's arm. "He wasn't supposed to be here yet." The investor turned, studying Marcus with an unreadable expression. "And who," he asked calmly, "decided that?" Claire stammered, having realized her mistake. Marcus cast his gaze to the floor, preparing for another insult, another round of humiliation. But instead, a hush fell over the room. The investor looked at Marcus, really looked at him, and a small smile formed on his face. Marcus knew that look. It wasn't the first time they'd met. But no one else in that room had any idea who he truly was. Not yet. Because in a few moments, when the meeting began, every person who had ever laughed at him would learn the truth, and nothing in that office would ever be the same again. The meeting room was abuzz with quiet tension. Everyone straightened their jackets and fixed their smiles as the investor took his seat at the head of the table. Marcus stood silently in the corner, ready to slip out before anyone noticed. But then, the investor's voice cut through the murmur of greetings. "Before we get started," he said, "I want to introduce somebody who's very important." Heads turned. Claire's nervous laugh filled the silence. "Oh, you mean our guest speakers?" "No," he interrupted, looking right at Marcus. "Him." The room froze. Dozens of pairs of eyes turned toward the janitor, who still had his mop in his hand. Claire blinked, confused. I don't understand."
The investor stood, his tone calm but sharp. "Perhaps you do not, but this man is not your janitor. He is the man who owns 30% of this company. The man who built the scholarship program that paid for half the people sitting in this room." There were gasps around the table. Claire's face blanched. Marcus stood still as a statue, his heart pounding against his chest. The years of quiet humiliation flashing before him. Every smirk, every insult, every moment he swallowed his pride just to keep the peace. He finally raised his head, to meet the looks of shock in all their faces. "I never needed to be seen," he said softly. "I just wanted to see who you really are."
The room fell silent. The same people who once looked through him now couldn't look at him. For the first time, Marcus didn't shrink into the background. He stood tall, not as the man they dismissed, but as the man who silently held the power all along. Outside, the city lights flickered against the glass, a silent reminder that truth, however long it may be concealed, will in time always find its way to shine through. The days that followed the meeting were strangely quiet. Whispers still lingered in the hallways, but now they carried guilt instead of mockery. Those who once ignored Marcus now nodded and smiled hesitantly at him, unsure how to face the man they underestimated. Claire tried to apologize, fumbling with words that would never fix what had been broken. Marcus just nodded. Forgiveness didn't come from excuses. Forgiveness came from change. He didn't want revenge. He wanted awareness. He wanted people to see that worth isn't defined by a title, a uniform, or the color of one's skin. For years, he'd watched judgment hide behind polite smiles and empty diversity speeches. Now, for once, they had to look in the mirror and see the truth reflected back.
A few months later, Marcus quietly resigned from the board and decided to establish a foundation to look after underprivileged workers, those that society does not notice, the invisible ones people really notice only when they need something cleaned, carried, or fixed, because he knew how it felt to be invisible. His story spread, not for revenge, but as a lesson in humanity. It made people introspect. How many times have we misjudged someone simply because of what they look like? Racism doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers in everyday moments, in silence, in assumption, in the way we choose not to see. Marcus's story reminds us that the most powerful truths aren't spoken to humiliate, but to heal. Because maybe the real question isn't, how could they treat him that way? Maybe it's this: how many more people are we still treating that way today?